Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling, I guess you could say, the challenge of balancing unwavering principles with the need for growth and interpretation.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely something we all grapple with, right?
Right. But, today's deep dive
For sure.
focuses on how this dynamic impacts the Baha'i community specifically.
And, what's really interesting is by examining this specific community, we can actually uncover universal insights that apply to any system of belief or ideology.
Totally. Yeah. Our source material today is this article called
I'm excited to dig into this.
The Pitfall of Extreme Literalism and Intolerance, a warning for spiritual growth in the Baha'i community. And wow.
I know, right?
Does it pack a punch?
Yeah, one of the key points that it raises is this tendency toward extreme literalism and how that can actually stifle progress.
Right off the bat, that reminds me of something Abdu'l-Baha said about how the shining spark of truth cometh forth only after the clash of differing opinions. It's like if everyone just blindly accepts things at face value, we're missing out on all this potential for growth and discovery.
Yeah, it's such a good point, and it speaks to a core principle that I think often gets overlooked. The real magic happens when we engage with diverse perspectives, even if, especially if they challenge our existing assumptions.
Yeah.
Think about some of the most groundbreaking scientific discoveries.
God, totally.
They often emerge from questioning accepted norms, not blindly adhering to them.
Exactly. But this article dives into how extreme literalism plays out specifically within the Baha'i community. I'm curious what stood out to you as particularly insightful.
Well, there's this anecdote in the article that really struck me.
Oh, yeah.
It was about someone who paraphrased a quote instead of using the exact wording.
Oh, no.
And get this, they were met with accusations of dishonesty and ignorance.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah.
It seems like the focus was more on the technicality of the quote than like the actual meaning behind it.
Precisely. And the article uses this example to highlight a larger issue. It's not just about this one incident. It's about the danger of creating an environment where people are afraid to share their thoughts or interpretations for fear of being judged.
It's like everyone's walking on eggshells, terrified of making a mistake or deviating from a rigid interpretation.
Yeah.
That definitely doesn't sound like a recipe for growth.
Right. And that stifles individual growth and ultimately hinders the progress of the community as a whole.
Right.
Goes against the very principles of unity and tolerance that are so central to the Baha'i teachings.
That's such a crucial point. It's about aligning our actions with the core values. Speaking of which, the article highlights some really powerful quotes from Baha'u'llah about unity and tolerance. Is there one that particularly resonated with you?
There's one that I think perfectly encapsulates the problem with this kind of judgmental attitude.
Okay.
O son of spirit, breathe not the sins of others so long as thou art thyself a sinner.
Ooh, that one hits hard.
Yeah.
It's a call for humility, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It reminds us that none of us are perfect. And that pointing fingers at others while ignoring our own shortcomings is not only hypocritical, but also hinders our own spiritual development.
This is making me think about how, historically clinging to literal interpretations, especially of religious texts, has often led to conflict and stagnation.
Oh, for sure.
The article uses the Adam and Eve story as a prime example, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It points out how clinging to a literal interpretation of that story often fuels conflict between science and religion.
Totally.
And that's where Baha'u'llah's symbolic interpretation offers such a valuable alternative.
Okay.
A way to bridge that divide by focusing on the deeper spiritual truths that the story conveys.
So instead of getting bogged down in debates about whether there was a literal Garden of Eden, we can explore the story's metaphorical meaning, the concepts of innocence and temptation, and the human condition.
Precisely. It shifts the focus from arguing over literal details to extracting universal wisdom that transcends specific contexts.
This is all super fascinating, but I'm wondering how we can actually apply these ideas in our own lives.
Yeah.
How can we move away from extreme literalism and embrace a more tolerant and open-minded approach?
Well, the article outlines a few practical steps, and the first one is encouraging critical thinking.
Okay.
We need to create spaces where people feel comfortable exploring different ideas, questioning assumptions, and here's the key, engaging in respectful debate.
It's about creating a culture of inquiry where disagreements aren't seen as threats,
All right.
but as opportunities to deepen our understanding. But that requires a certain level of I don't know, fearlessness.
Absolutely. It takes courage to step outside of our comfort zones and genuinely consider viewpoints that challenge our own.
Totally.
But that discomfort is often where the most transformative growth happens.
It makes me think of that saying, a ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right.
And the second step the article highlights is practicing humility, remembering that we don't have all the answers, and that everyone is on their own unique learning journey.
It's like approaching every interaction with a beginner's mind, right? Being open to learning something new, even from those we might perceive as being less knowledgeable than ourselves.
Exactly. And along with that comes forgiveness, both for ourselves and others.
For sure.
We're all bound to make mistakes as we navigate this journey of growth.
Yeah.
It's about fostering an environment where those mistakes aren't met with judgment, but with understanding and support.
So it's about shifting the focus from being right to focusing on learning and growth. And for that to happen, we need to create safe spaces where people feel comfortable being vulnerable and expressing their true thoughts and feelings.
Right. And that brings us to the third crucial step outlined in the article.
Okay.
It's not enough to simply encourage critical thinking and humility.
Yeah.
We also need to actively cultivate environments where those qualities can flourish.
So what does a safe space actually look like in practice? How can we create those kinds of environments?
Well, that's a great question, and it's something we'll delve into deeper in the next part of our deep dive.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah, me too. Creating safe spaces really boils down to fostering an environment
Yeah.
where individuals feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and interpretations without fear of judgment or ridicule.
For sure.
It's about promoting respectful dialogue, even when, and perhaps especially when people have differing viewpoints.
So it's not just about avoiding conflict altogether.
Right.
Because let's be real, disagreements are bound to arise. It's more about how we handle those disagreements, right?
Exactly. It's about shifting from a mindset of defensiveness and trying to prove ourselves right to one of genuine curiosity and a willingness to understand where the other person is coming from.
It reminds me of that quote about seeking first to understand, then to be understood.
Yes. And that requires a conscious effort to really listen to what the other person is saying, not just waiting for our turn to speak or formulate a rebuttal.
I think it also involves being mindful of our tone.
Oh, for sure.
And the language we use.
Absolutely.
It's easy to slip into accusatory or judgmental language, even without intending to.
That's so true. And even subtle cues like body language and facial expressions can convey a sense of judgment or dismissiveness.
Oh, yeah.
It's about creating an atmosphere of warmth and receptivity where people feel truly seen and heard.
So it's not just about what we say, it's about how we say it and the overall energy we bring to the conversation.
Right.
This is making me think about the idea that the article touches on about building a new civilization requiring a new mindset. What do you think that means in a practical sense?
Well, to me, it means recognizing that the old patterns of us versus them clinging to rigid dogma and shutting down dissenting views simply won't work if we're striving for a more unified world.
Yeah.
It requires a fundamental shift in how we approach differences and disagreements.
It's like we need to upgrade our operating system as a society, install a new version that's better equipped to handle the complexities of a diverse and interconnected world.
I love that analogy. And part of that upgrade involves developing our critical thinking skills, which are essential for navigating the constant influx of information we're bombarded with these days.
It's about learning to discern fact from fiction, to evaluate different perspectives and to form our own informed opinions rather than blindly accepting what we hear or read.
Exactly. And that discernment is closely intertwined with humility.
Okay.
Because when we approach things with humility, we're more likely to question our own assumptions, consider alternative viewpoints, and acknowledge that we might not have all the answers.
Humility creates space for learning and growth.
For sure.
While arrogance shuts it down. And it allows us to be more forgiving, not just of others, but of ourselves. Because, let's face it, we all make mistakes. We all have blind spots.
Absolutely. Mistakes are an inevitable part of the learning process. It's about how we respond to those mistakes that matters most.
Do we beat ourselves up and get stuck in a cycle of shame and guilt? Or do we see those mistakes as opportunities for growth and course correction?
Precisely. And that brings us back to the importance of creating those safe spaces.
Yeah.
Because in a truly safe environment, people feel comfortable admitting when they're wrong, asking for help, and learning from their mistakes.
It creates a culture of support and encouragement rather than judgment and condemnation.
Right. And it allows individuals to take risks, to experiment, to put themselves out there without fear of being ridiculed or ostracized if they stumble.
This is all resonating so deeply, but I'm also feeling the weight of the challenge.
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about these principles, but actually living them out day in and day out.
For sure.
That's where the real work lies, right?
You're absolutely right. It's an ongoing process,
Yeah.
a conscious choice we make each day to strive towards these ideals.
And it's not always easy.
Right.
We're going to encounter resistance both internally and externally. There will be times when we fall short. When old patterns resurface, when we revert to those ingrained habits of judgment and defensiveness.
Exactly. And that's where the real test of our commitment lies.
Okay.
How do we navigate those inevitable challenges and stay true to the vision of a more tolerant, understanding, and unified world?
It's like embarking on a journey without a map, knowing that there will be obstacles and detours along the way.
Well said. And that's precisely what we'll delve into in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore those potential challenges and discuss practical strategies for staying the course even when things get tough.
Okay, so we've talked about, fostering tolerance, humility, open-mindedness, but putting these principles into action.
Oh, yeah.
Not always easy.
For sure, it requires conscious effort and a willingness to challenge, deeply ingrained habits and patterns of thinking.
And let's be real, sometimes the biggest hurdle isn't even our own internal resistance.
Right.
It's dealing with resistance from others.
Absolutely. It's one thing to embrace these ideas within ourselves, but it's a whole different ballgame when we encounter people who are firmly entrenched in their own beliefs.
Yeah.
Especially when those people are close to us. Family, friends, colleagues.
It can feel like you're speaking different languages. You're trying to have a nuanced conversation about the importance of unity and understanding, but the other person is hearing it as an attack on their deeply held convictions.
Right. And in those situations, it's easy to get discouraged. You start to question whether it's even worth the effort.
Yeah.
But I think it's crucial to remember that change is rarely a linear process.
For sure.
It's messy, it's unpredictable, and it takes time.
It's like planting a seed. You can't just force it to sprout on your timeline.
Right.
You need to create the right conditions, nurture it patiently, and trust the process.
That's a great analogy. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply model the behavior we want to see in others.
Okay.
Approach those conversations with humility, kindness, and genuine curiosity.
Even if the other person isn't immediately swayed by your perspective, they might at least be more open to listening and considering things from a different angle.
Exactly. It's about planting those seeds of doubt, sparking their curiosity, and creating space for them to potentially shift their perspective down the line.
Makes me think of that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Oh, that's a good one.
If we can demonstrate that we genuinely care about understanding their viewpoint, it can go a long way in bridging that divide.
Absolutely. And sometimes the most valuable thing we can do is simply listen without judgment.
Yeah.
Create a space where the other person feels truly heard and respected, even if we don't agree with everything they say.
It's about validating their feelings, acknowledging their right to hold their own beliefs, even if we disagree with those beliefs.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that we don't always need to have all the answers.
Right.
Or win the argument.
Right.
Sometimes the most powerful act is simply to create a space for dialogue and connection, to plant those seeds of understanding and trust.
This is also helpful, but I'm also wondering about how we deal with our own internal resistance because, let's face it, sometimes the biggest obstacle to embodying these principles is our own ego.
Oh, for sure. It's easy to point fingers at others and judge their closed-mindedness, but the real work begins with looking inward.
Yeah.
Are we truly willing to let go of our own biases, assumptions, and the need to be right?
It can be humbling, to say the least, to confront those deeply ingrained patterns within ourselves, especially those biases that we might not even be aware of.
Right, and that's where self-awareness becomes so crucial. Taking the time to reflect on our own thoughts, beliefs, and motivations, noticing those knee-jerk reactions, the subtle judgments that arise.
It's like shining a light on those shadowy corners of our minds that we tend to avoid.
Exactly, and once we bring those shadows into the light of awareness, we can start to challenge them, dismantle them, and create space for new ways of thinking and being.
It's an ongoing process of refinement, isn't it?
For sure.
A commitment to continual growth and self-improvement.
Absolutely, and it's about approaching that process with compassion and patience. We're all works in progress, constantly evolving and learning.
This whole conversation has been so insightful and inspiring. It feels like a call to action to not only embrace these principles intellectually, but to actively embody them in our daily lives.
I agree, and while it might feel daunting at times, remember that even small acts of kindness, understanding, and open-mindedness can have a ripple effect.
It's like those beautiful words from Baha'u'llah, the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. We're all interconnected, part of this one human family, despite our differences.
And that interconnectedness reminds us that our actions, no matter how small they may seem, have the potential to contribute to a more unified and harmonious world.
Powerful reminder that we all have a role to play in creating the kind of world we want to live in. And it starts with the choices we make each day to choose kindness over judgment, understanding over division, and love over fear.
So well said. And on that note, I think it's fitting to close with a beautiful quote from Baha'u'llah that perfectly encapsulates the essence of our deep dive today. He said, "Let your vision be world-embracing rather than confined to your own self."
Beautiful reminder that our capacity for love, compassion, and understanding has no limits. And it's a call to action to keep expanding our hearts and minds, to keep striving towards a world where everyone feels a sense of belonging and purpose.
It's been such a pleasure diving deep with you today.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep those seeds of unity and understanding flowing.